Greetings, listeners, and welcome to the first episode of The Tale Collector. I'm your host, Erica Adams. In this monthly radio series, I'm going to tell you about a story and its creation, whether it be a book, movie, video game, some music, a show, or any other medium that I believe deserves attention or discussion. I will choose them based on an occasion corresponding in some ways to the creator's life or the story's time or theme. I will also make sure to mention the rating or age recommendation of a given story beforehand so that everyone will know whether it is appropriate for them or their families. And with that said, let's get started. This first episode is particularly special to me because July 28th is also the day that my first book, Allie's Adventure on the Wonder, was first published as an ebook. On a similar note, this is also the anniversary of a web series that, despite its primary focus on video games, encourages creative thinking for anyone pursuing an interest or even career in any kind of artistic media. Today, I am going to tell you about Extra Credits, airing from 2008 to the present and recommended for viewers 16 and up. Extra Credits was conceived while creator and animator Daniel Floyd was a student at the Savannah College of Art and Design, making lecture videos for his courses in respective art history and media theory. He later began making more videos, then unofficially called Video Games and, insert topic or issue here, with the help of game designer James Portnow, who has, quote, worked on everything from Call of Duty to Farmville, unquote. Initially featured on the online magazine The Escapist, as well as on the Penny Arcade Distribution Channel, PATV. As of 2014, the official series has begun airing on its own YouTube channel on a weekly basis. Episodes typically run anywhere from 4.5 to 10 minutes, and the visual style of the show, according to Floyd, is loosely based on that of Ben Yahtzee Crosshaw's YouTube series of video game reviews, Zero Punctuation. Floyd himself hosts and narrates each episode, standing behind a podium like a professor before a class of students, and addressing the viewers in a voice that has been altered to an amusingly higher pitch than normal. Adding to the entertainment value of the presentation, he, Portnow, and the rest of the show's staff are presented as cute cartoon stick-like doodles, and video games, when described generally, are personified as green squares, most likely because of how many games today come in green cases, i.e. Xbox, complete with faces, hands, and feet. Altogether, they engage in exploits that, along with random internet images, become visual puns when coupled with whatever statement Floyd is presenting at the moment. Throughout its 7+ seasons, there have been both official show artists, as well as guest artists, who may do the art for just a few episodes. That said, a running gag of the series that I find to be one of the funniest is when the show's artist, at the time, is depicted as being the one who is the craziest of the bunch and the one whose antics are among the quirkiest. For instance, the show's first main artist, Alison Theus, often drew her cartoon form with claws and fangs. Either that, or it would be carrying the eraser end of a giant pencil in a threatening manner. She, the cartoon form, would then chase and attack the panicking Floyd or Portnow or other figures for comedic effect. Another tradition that the Extra Credits creators partake in that I thoroughly enjoy occurs every Halloween. On an episode that occurs on or near the holiday, the Extra Credits cartoon avatars are drawn, dressed up as various video game characters. Juxtaposing this entertaining style is the show's didactic premise. Extra Credits means not only to educate future video game designers on how to create engaging, high-quality games and how to market and sell them to both publishers and players, but to promote video games as a legitimate, respectable form of art, much like literature, film, and music. There are many topics related to games that each episode covers. according to their YouTube channel websites. Some of these include, but are not limited to, game narrative, or how to tell memorable stories effectively in games through mechanics and gameplay as well as visuals, game community, or how players treat non-players and each other both inside and outside of video games, especially with regards to politics, controversy, and social issues like racial and sexual diversity, game industry, or essentially the business end of video game creation, presentation, and distribution, and my personal favorite, game analysis, the exploration of games, both individual and in general, and how they can and do impact the real lives of people and what these games can teach us as players, designers, and most importantly, human beings. It was one of these videos that I found first, and thus introduced me to Extra Credits. While I was searching for videos of Journey, an exquisite video game from the developer, That Game Company, I discovered the two-part Extra Credits episodes, The Hero's Journey, in which Floyd discusses the narrative concept of the hero's journey as first coined by famed mythologist Joseph Campbell in his book The Hero with a Thousand Faces, using examples from the game Journey to illustrate how this concept can be used more effectively in video games. The Extra Credits YouTube channel also features some other shows created and hosted by the same staff and shown with their signature animation style. These include Extra Remix, in which Floyd talks about musicians who specialize in remixing video game tunes with their own unique styles. Design Club, in which Floyd discusses a specific game level, item, or mechanic and how it serves to enhance its respective game and the experience of the gameplay. James Recommends, a sort of expansion on the games you might not have heard of or tried episodes. This one is the exception to the animation rule, featuring Portnow in live action, as he chooses a game that may not have gotten a lot of attention upon release, and talks about what is interesting about it and why it deserves to be played. Extra History, in which Floyd, rather than talking about video games, instead focuses on lesser-known events in real-world history, such as the seminal tragedy that led to World War I, the Second Punic War, and the history of the Zulu Empire in Africa, just to name a few. And finally, the miniseries Side Quest. Similar to the Let's Play videos so often seen on YouTube, this spin-off features Dan playing Dark Souls with James coaching him, and the two discussing the game throughout. At the moment, new episodes of Extra Remix and Design Club have been postponed, but new episodes of the main Extra Credits series, James Recommends, and Extra History are uploaded to the EC YouTube channel every Wednesday, Friday, and Saturday, respectively. Episodes of Side Quests will be uploaded every Monday and Thursday, and the Dark Souls portion will have a planned running time of about 6 weeks as of June 1st. Whether they will continue this series with more games afterwards remains to be seen. In Floyd's own words, the EC team has called themselves gaming's evangelists, trying to disprove all of the negative stereotypes of video games and all who enjoy them. This is doubly important, as games are so often used as scapegoats whenever senseless and tragic acts of violence, like public shootings, occur, among other reasons. It's not only that the team wants to show that games aren't bad, it's that they want to show how and why games can be good, and that they have redeeming value and potential to be educational and therapeutic as well as entertaining. Extra Credits is fun, informative, and a must-see for not only game enthusiasts, but media students and creative thinkers as a whole. Gather round next time for another tale you may have forgotten or have never heard before. Until then, listeners, may inspiration always find you. Greetings, listeners, and welcome back to another episode of The Tale Collector, celebrating stories and storytelling in all their forms and the bards and artists who bring them all to life. I'm your host, Erica Adams. Throughout my life, it has been very rare that a book will actually move me to tears, but when it does, it really does. Only 4 novels have ever had this sort of impact on me. Paulo Coelho's The Alchemist, from sheer joy, J.K. Rowling's Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, for what I'm sure are probably obvious reasons by now, and Kate DiCamello's The Miraculous Journey of Edward Tulane, for both a bit of sadness and hope. The 4th I am going to discuss here today, for its evocative honesty in the midst of its relentless anguish. I'm going to talk about A Monster Calls, released in 2007 and recommended for readers age 12 and up. A Monster Calls tells the story of Connor, a 13-year-old boy living in present-day Britain. Ever since his mother was diagnosed with a terrible illness, implied to be cancer due to the descriptions of hair loss and the treatments that sap all her energy, Connor has been suffering from constant nightmares, or rather, a single nightmare over and over again, involving a black creature with long tentacles and glowing eyes that threaten to paralyze and suffocate him. One night, however, to Connor's great surprise, he wakes up to find another kind of monster, this one very real and very different, seeming to be made up of branches that, according to a passage on page 5, twist around one another, always creaking, always groaning, and thin needle-like leaves weaving together to make a green furry skin that moves and breathes as if there were muscles and lungs underneath. This new monster claims to be the very spirit of the earth, most often taking the form of a yew tree. More to the point, it claims that it was summoned by Connor himself, yet the latter can't recall such a thing. The reason for its coming, says the monster, is to heal Connor, from what Connor has no idea. But in order to do so, the monster must tell Connor 3 stories from his past travels across the lands of the world, after which Connor will be commanded to tell the monster a 4th story in turn, a truth that he has been denying, and that he would rather die than admit to anyone. Though this novel was written by Chaos Walking Trilogy author Patrick Ness, the idea for it was conceived by Shaban Daoud, writing activist and author of 4 young adult novels. She was unfortunately diagnosed with severe terminal breast cancer, and on August 21, 2007, passed away at the age of 47 before she could develop the idea further. After she died, Ness was contacted by Dowd's Walker Books editor, Denise Johnstone Burt, who had previously worked with both writers, though the two had never met personally, to put Dowd's story to paper. To this day, A Monster Calls is the only book whose creators have been awarded both the Carnegie and Kate Greenway medals, Ness for literature and Jim Kay for illustration, respectively. For anyone seeing this book for the first time, it would be very easy to believe that it is a horror or suspense story. That's what I believed at first, and not only because of its title. According to the biography at the back of the book, Kay, quote, used everything from beetles to breadboards to create interesting marks and textures, unquote. Indeed, many of the pictures have a very harsh, scratchy look to them, especially the monster itself, with its thousands of dense clusters of branches and twigs, making it appear all the more wild and imposing, just like nature and the land it embodies and represents. The sky and other environments throughout often appear blotted or streaked, like either a terrible storm is brewing and just waiting to unleash its wrath, or the sky itself is as miserable as the characters in the story and just as unable or unwilling to shed its tears. In many scenes, Connor is often depicted as a white silhouette against almost complete blackness, whether it be the monster, his nightmare, or even sometimes the real world, symbolizing, at least to me, how the worst aspects of Connor's reality continually threaten to overwhelm what parts of himself remain and swallow him up. No human faces are ever visually depicted, but but on the rare occasion that eyes are shown, like those of the monster or some animal, they are always completely white, with no pupils, and either cold and unpredictable or dull and inert. While this story certainly is frightening to an extent, it is less so in the sense of devilish horror than of pure despair. From Connor's point of view, the reader gets the sense that he feels he's the only one who has any faith that his mother will eventually recover, fueling the seemingly justified bitterness that Connor harbors within his heart. While he believes and wishes for his mother's life more than anything, it is as though the rest of his family is simply giving up and moving on with their own lives while wanting Connor to be brave or talk about what's going to happen. His divorced father, for instance, is remarried with another child and living in America, which in itself is painful. But there are also some particularly excruciating moments, like when his new American habits present themselves, namely the annoying tendency to call Connor childish names like champ and sport, as seen from a shortened passage on pages 86 through 88. "How you hanging in there, champ?" his father asked him while they waited for the waitress to bring them their pizzas. "Champ?" Connor asked, raising a skeptical eyebrow. "Sorry," his father said, smiling bashfully. "America is almost a whole different language. Your sister's doing well. Almost walking." "Half-sister," Connor said. "I can't wait for you to meet her," his father said. "We'll have to arrange for a visit soon, maybe even this Christmas. Would you like that?" Connor ran a hand along the edge of the table. "So it'd be just a visit, then?" "What do you mean?" his father asked, sounding surprised. "A visit as opposed to—" He trailed off, and Connor knew he'd worked out what he meant. But Connor suddenly didn't want him to finish. Connor's grandmother is shown to be unnaturally modern, businesslike, and independent, treating Connor less like a grandson than just a problem to be dealt with like anything else on a daily basis, as shown on page 39. Connor's grandma wasn't like other grandmas. He'd met Lily's grandma loads of times, and she was how grandmas were supposed to be, crinkly and smiley, with white hair and the whole lot. She cooked meals where she made 3 separate, eternally boiled vegetable portions for everybody, and would giggle in the corner at Christmas with a small glass of sherry and a paper crown on her head. Connor's grandma wore tailored pantsuits, dyed her hair to keep out the gray, and said things that made no sense at all, like, 60 is the new 50, or classic cars need the most expensive polish. What did that even mean? She emailed birthday cards, would argue with waiters over wine, and still had a job. Her house was even worse, filled with expensive old things you could never touch, like a clock she wouldn't even let the cleaning lady dust, which was another thing. What kind of grandma had a cleaning lady? 2 sugars, no milk, she called from the sitting room as Connor made the tea, as if he didn't know that from the last 3,000 times she visited. Going back to the monster, Connor is not at all fearful of it at first, and is highly skeptical of its purpose behind its storytelling, but the monster is quick to tell him otherwise, on page 35. Connor blinked, then blinked again. "You're going to tell me stories?" "Indeed," the monster said. "Well—" Connor looked around in disbelief. "How is that a nightmare?" "Stories are the wildest things of all," the monster rumbled. "Stories chase and bite and hunt." While the monster's stories may have simple fairy tale-like beginnings, the characters within and their actions and justifications prove to be far more complicated than Connor ever expected, not unlike himself, as the monster ultimately teaches him through pain, love, and personal reflection. In spite of all the apparent lifelessness that permeates this book, life itself is perhaps its most powerful theme, not only the kind that dictates the natural world, but the kind that defines and is defined by humanity as a whole, how we actually live as opposed to how we merely think. Shown on page 191, "You were merely wishing for the end of pain," the monster said. "Your own pain. It is the most human wish of all." "I didn't mean it," Connor said. "You did," the monster said, "but you also did not." Connor sniffed and looked up to its face, which was as big as a wall in front of him. "How can both be true?" "The answer is that it does not matter what you think," the monster said, "because your mind will contradict itself 100 times each day. Your mind will believe comforting lies while also knowing the painful truths that make those lies necessary, and your mind will punish you for believing both." "But how do you fight it?" Connor asked, his voice rough. "How do you fight all the different stuff inside?" "By speaking the truth," the monster said. I have not had the pleasure of reading any works from Dowd or Ness, but I can definitely see how they both came to be so beloved in the literary world. I believe I can honestly say that Ness did Dowd and her final idea justice with this hauntingly beautiful tale. This will likely resonate most with those who have had to suffer the emotionally raw and complex pain of losing a loved one, especially when that loss is prolonged but ultimately inevitable. Gather round next time for another tale you may have forgotten or have never heard before. Until then, listeners, may inspiration always find you. Greetings, listeners, and welcome back to another episode of The Tale Collector, celebrating stories and storytelling in all their forms, and the bards and artists who bring them all to life. I'm your host, Erica Adams. Now here is a show that I often had a hard time catching, mainly because of the fact that it was on HBO, and so it had highly unpredictable air times, plus I could only watch it on the living room TV, and even then only when I was alone and had the TV to myself. When I did get the chance to watch, however, it was nothing short of a dream for me as a connoisseur of both animation and storytelling. Plus, you can imagine the ecstasy I felt when I finally found it on DVD. I present Animated Tales of the World, first airing around 2000 and recommended for viewers 6 and up. Animated Tales of the World consists of 39 15-minute shorts in total. 2 of these would be featured together to make a half-hour-long TV episode. As I said, while I didn't see much of these on TV, I'm not entirely sure that many of these shorts were actually put on the air, as I realized after researching the show. It's too bad, really, because I think the sheer variety it offers means that it could appeal to just about anybody. I expect that when most people, at least in North America, think of the old stories today, they often think about those of the Brothers Grimm or Hans Christian Andersen. Cinderella, Little Red Riding Hood, The Ugly Duckling, and the like. Not that there's anything wrong with these stories. They are most certainly classics, and they have a great deal to teach us, whether we are 1 or 100. But what I enjoy most about this series is that every episode features stories that are not as well known in this part of the world, and those that are essentially the same stories we've been told since infancy, or that at least have elements and tropes that we may be very familiar with, are presented in ways different enough to keep interest fresh for both younger and older viewers. One example of this is the German tale, The Enchanted Lion, which contains story patterns seen in Beauty and the Beast and various tales featuring a maiden traveling for years in search of her lost true love. Here, a maiden is forced to live with a lion after her father steals one of his roses, but the lion later explains to her that he is a prince cursed by a witch to be a lion during the day and also, later, to fly non-stop for 7 years as a dove. Another tale, King Solomon and the Bee, from Israel, is a lot like The Lion and the Mouse. When a baby bee mistakes King Solomon's nose for a flower and stings it, the king is rightly furious. The bee feels terrible and promises to make it up to King Solomon by helping him somehow. The king thinks this hilariously unlikely, but releases the bee anyway. But then, when the Queen of Sheba presents Solomon with a challenge to test his legendary wisdom, the bee comes to his rescue when he gets stumped. Those tales, and their respective places of origin for that matter, that I personally hadn't heard of prior to watching Animated Tales of the World, include The Shoemaker's Son from Armenia, located in Western Asia, in which a clueless king keeps trying to learn why the titular character and his friends are always so happy despite being so poor, while the king's royal gatherings are always boring and miserable. And in The Manarins, from Catalonia, Spain, a farmer foolishly gambles away what portions of his field he can't plow within a day, but his resourceful daughter may, or may not, have found the solution in the Manarins, tiny, hyperactive bug-like creatures that cause uncontrolled mayhem if not given a task of any kind to channel their overloaded energy. What's especially unique about this show is its diverse animation. Here are just a few examples. Amuninyan, a Cinderella-esque tale from Namibia, a country in southern Africa, is done in CGI with the characters looking as though they were modeled out of numerous coils of copper wire. The 2D style of Raven Steals the Daylight, which suggests that the reason why the sky now has the sun is thanks to Raven the Trickster, is based on the totem-like art of its native Alaska, with its fluid curves, symmetrical shaping, and juxtaposing of bright and dark colors. The Loch Ness Kelpie, a Scottish story in which a boy battles the legendary water monster by stealing its magical bridle, has its backgrounds done in watercolors, while the human characters and most objects are solidly colored, almost completely unshaded and unseparated by dark lines except for on the faces for purposes of expression. And in The Story of Flax, a tale from Poland which describes how the material flax was accidentally created by a greedy king, the animation is 2D but actually looks like stop motion, as if construction paper cutouts have been layered on top of each other, with the forming lines long, jagged, and very broad. Music also serves as a teaching tool for young viewers in this series. Some episodes feature songs, whose sounds and lyrics both enhance the plot and reflect the story's respective culture. These include the American tall tale, John Henry, the Steel Driving Man, featuring the African-American hero who saved the jobs of the railroad workers by defeating a giant drill in a mining challenge. The Irish tale, The Boy Who Had No Story, in which an unwanted series of strange events befalls timid Rory after an old crone turns him away for being unable to recite a tale for her in exchange for shelter. The story from the Caribbean, The Chief and the Carpenter, about a crazy chief who forces his people to build a tower out of their furniture, houses, and trees so that he can touch the moon and make himself famous. And The Magic Paintbrush from China, in which a boy who wants to be a great artist is given an enchanted brush that can bring anything painted with it to life, and which he uses to outwit an evil emperor. What will be especially beneficial to parents and teachers is the discussion topics feature, included on the DVD of each episode. These are questions and suggestions for children to get them thinking about the story and its characters and plot. These topics are all specific to their respective story, but in general, they include, but are not limited to, compare or contrast the two main characters, usually the protagonist and the villain. Sketch or list the sequence of events that lead up to the main accomplishment or the climax of the story. Describe how the protagonist uses trickery or other means to accomplish his or her goal. List the ways in which another character aids the protagonist. List other tales you've read or heard that also include similar themes to the ones seen in this story. Write a caption for a given image and describe how you would capture the emotion with just a brief statement. Explain the meaning behind, or describe the emotion of, a given image. Explain your reaction to an event from a given story. Answer a question using the given video clip for review. There is also a teacher's guide booklet included in each DVD case, with a list of basic definitions of multiple types of stories, as well as suggested related projects and activities for teachers to try out with students. If there was ever a TV show that provides a fantastic introduction on the rich diversity of world culture and art for children, media students, and story lovers at large, Animated Tales of the World is it, opening viewers up to a realm of imagination in the context of real-life people, places, and history. Gather round next time for another tale you may have forgotten or have never heard before. Until then, listeners, may inspiration always find you. Greetings, listeners, and welcome back to another episode of The Tale Collector, celebrating stories and storytelling in all their forms, and the bards and artists who bring them all to life. I'm your host, Erica Adams. While I do enjoy the horror genre a lot, nowadays I don't often willingly engage in a scary story for things like excessive amounts of gore, make-out scenes that precede an over-the-top kill, or excruciatingly drawn-out montages of physical torture. No pun intended. Of course, if any of these things add something to the story and its message or performance or both, that's fine. Plus, I'm not the type to faint at the sight of blood. I would just prefer them not to be the only things included in the story exclusively for their own sake. Now, this is just my personal opinion. I mean no disrespect to those who enjoy such stories. My point is that, like any other genre, but especially in horror, I prefer subtlety. I like reasoning behind the fearfulness of the world I'm experiencing. Or, if the reasoning isn't clear, I at least want to be able to ponder it for myself. And what better way to explore these ideas in depth than through the interactivity of video games? I'm going to talk about LIMBO, released July 21st, 2010 for the Xbox Live Arcade, and rated T for teen due to animated blood and mild violence. That said, I should add a disclaimer before I begin. I will be describing some highly graphic imagery, which mainly involves violent acts towards children, and so both player and listener discretion are strongly advised. The closest thing to a plot, never mind synopsis, that Limbo offers is this single line. Uncertain of his sister's fate, a boy enters limbo. This concept is much less obviously presented in the game itself, but it is quite literally all that you will know going into it. Everything else must be learned through play. Players take on the role of a small boy with no name, no face, and no identity, save for his glowing white eyes, who awakens in a bleak and colorless world. What this world is, and how the boy got there, are just a few of the many mysteries players will encounter, and it quickly becomes clear that it is filled with dangers not always apparent until it is too late. Now, I will admit, I have actually played very few horror-based video games in my life. And those I have played were arcade shooters like Area 51, Crypt Killer, and House of the Dead, and while I still have a blast with those to this day, they offer very little in terms of psychological depth and exploration of meaning. Limbo is the first horror game that I've bought and owned that offers these, as well as the initial reason I bought an Xbox 360 in the first place. Limbo is the first game made by Playdead, an independent game studio headquartered in Copenhagen, Denmark. Arndt Jensen co-founded Playdead along with his partner Dino Patti to put together the ideas that would eventually become Limbo. Jensen wanted the game to have a specific aesthetic feel while keeping the controls simple, nothing but moving, jumping, pushing, and pulling, and the gameplay straightforward, so that players would have an easier time getting the hang of the game and, from there, have a more meaningful experience with it overall. Limbo is a 2D puzzle platform side-scroller presented in a sort of shadow puppet-like style. The boy and the creatures and objects within are all black silhouettes against backgrounds of differing shades of black and white and gray. The visuals are grainy and dim, as if seen through an old film projector, and are reminiscent of film noir. Another fascinating aspect of Limbo is that it has been called by its creators a trial and death game, in that the boy can and will die in a myriad of ways, from decapitation by a bear trap to electrocution from a hotel's neon sign to being crushed or cut apart by mechanical equipment. And traps aren't the only thing the boy and the player will have to worry about. The boy must survive the wrath of other life forms, such as giant spiders, which will strike and impale the boy with their long, hairy, claw-like legs. Grotesque, glowing larva-like creatures called by fans names like brain worms or brain slugs because of how they will attach themselves to the boy's head like a parasite, forcing him, or the player, to run or walk in a single direction without being able to stop. And, strangely enough, what appear to be other young boys, which, for unknown reasons, will either try to kill the protagonist boy directly or avoid him while letting the deadly traps that they themselves have set up do the killing for them. There is a gore filter option on the menu for more sensitive players who don't want to see the death animations. Due to the art style, many of the sinister traps aren't always visible or obvious to the player as they tend to blend in with the environment. When they are, it's usually only after they've killed you. Luckily, players are always put back very close to where they died, so that they can get right back to solving the puzzle. There are no tutorials, cutscenes, loading times, dialogue, or text. While this may sound troublesome to an extent, the benefit of this is that the flow and the action will never be interrupted, letting the player be completely swept in. What I personally love about Limbo is its atmosphere and its symbolism. One doesn't need to see or hear much to know that this is a very tense, creepy, and unwelcoming place. The choices made in sound design are incredible, especially given that the entire official soundtrack of Limbo, composed by the masterful Martin Stig Andersen, is literally less than 20 minutes long. Interestingly, much of the game is comprised of only sound effects against a backdrop of silence, from the boy's panting and footsteps as he runs, to the chirping, scurrying animals in the forest, to the cranking and banging of factory machinery in an abandoned city, adding to the feeling of desolation and loneliness. The actual music is generally comprised of single, deep, echoing notes which match the game's dark and dismal tone, as well as ambient notes that are as soft and fluid, but deceptively surreal, as the waters that swallow the boy up and drown him should he venture too deeply into them. The intentional lack of basic information regarding how the world of Limbo works allows players to consider what the game means. This has left many, both players and critics alike, divided, as it can leave one feeling either inspired or confused. In spite of this, numerous theories and ideas have been offered online based on players' experiences with it as well as what's actually in the game. For instance, one of the most popular and plausible pieces of evidence that suggests that the boy has in fact been dead throughout the game lies in the game's title menu. Just visible through the rain and washed-out light are some flies, which hover over what could possibly be the outline of a small human body lying in the grass. And the title itself suggests that the boy is in a kind of purgatory, since the word limbo is derived from the Latin word limbus, which means edge. In this case, this could be indicative of the edge of hell. With this in mind, what would you believe? Is the boy truly in limbo? And if so, why? Did he do something so heinous in life that he is now fated to forever travel alone and unprotected through this harsh world? Or could he be traveling in order to find atonement and reach heaven? And if his sister can be found, are either of them or both of them dead? What, if anything, do the traps, creatures, and environments represent? Is this entire experience just a dream? That's for you to decide. While not the first video game to stand out purely for its artistic merit, it is one of the few that proves that a game does not always have to be flashy or grand in order to garner praise. Depending on skill level, Limbo can be completed in about 2 to 6 hours. Short though this may seem, I believe it is better to end a brief but meaningful experience wanting more, rather than sit through a longer one that is less than stellar. Limbo is a perfect example of how less really can be more and still be able to leave a lingering chill in the air and a philosophical conundrum in the mind. Gather round next time for another tale you may have forgotten or have never heard before. Until then, listeners, may inspiration always find you. Greetings, fair listeners, and welcome back to another episode of The Tale Collector, celebrating stories and storytelling in all their forms and the bards and artists who bring them all to life. I'm your host, Erica Adams. In the summer of 2005, just after I graduated my senior year in high school in fact, I joined their travel club and took a 12-day trip to the United Kingdom. Our first stop was Dublin, Ireland. While that portion of the trip only lasted 2 days, unfortunately, I still got to see and experience a great deal. For me, the highlight of Ireland was the chance to see the legendary Book of Kells, an illuminated manuscript written in Latin that contains, among other texts, the 4 Gospels of the New Testament. It is believed to have been made around 800 AD and is now kept on display within the Trinity College Library in Dublin. It is not only the exquisitely elaborate art within the book and its illustrious and often mysterious history that have made it unique to this day. The book and its creation are an example of aesthetic beauty taking precedence over educational practicality. This concept, as well as the book that inspired it, are the main focus of today's episode. And so, here is The Secret of Kells, released in 2009 and recommended for viewers 9 and up. This French-Belgian-Irish film is a fictionalized account of the creation of the Book of Kells. The protagonist is Brendan, a bright and curious, though shy 12-year-old boy living within the medieval Abbey of Kells. He has a passion for art and illumination, which he shares with the scholarly monks to whom he is apprenticed. But his uncle and guardian, Abbot Kelloc, disapproves of this, as he is obsessed with the construction of the massive wall that surrounds the abbey for protection against the Vikings that have been ravaging the populated regions of Ireland in their relentless search for gold. With the help of the eccentric but fatherly Master Illuminator Brother Aidan and the plucky forest fairy Aisling, Brendan must not only learn to perfect his artistic talents and show his uncle how much his art means to him and others, but also to conquer his fears and embrace the world with both its beauty and its dangers. Only then will he be able to complete the magical Book of Iona, later to be famously known as the Book of Kells. The Secret of Kells took many moviegoers by surprise when it was chosen, seemingly out of nowhere, as a nominee for Best Animated Feature at the 82nd Academy Awards in 2010, though it ultimately lost to Disney's Up. The director, Tom Moore, and his friends and fellow animators were inspired to create the film after watching films like Disney's Mulan, Richard Williams' The Thief and the Cobbler, and the anime films of Hayao Miyazaki, namely Princess Mononoke and Spirited Away. Seeing how these films were heavily influenced by the art and visual aesthetics of the countries in which the film's stories take place, Chinese, Persian, Arabian, and Japanese, respectively, Moore and his team decided to do the same with ancient Celtic and Gaelic art, with its rounded curves and swirls blended with straight lines and perfect symmetry, while at the same time using that art to illustrate, pun intended, some of the rich history, mythos, and culture of its native country. The characters and settings were created with very specific design choices in mind, not only with regards to the Celtic art style of the real Book of Kells, but also to the imaginative mindset that the practicing illuminators hold. With a few exceptions, many of the monks of Kells are almost quite literally built with, and like, basic shapes. Their shoulders and hunched backs may be angular like squares, with the folds of the robes being triangles so that the monks resemble stained glass figures, or curved in near-perfect half circles so that they look almost like small simply drawn hills with heads and limbs. Moreover, each monk is from a country outside of Ireland, come together to create manuscripts of beauty and inspiration. Here is an excerpt from the film's art book, Designing the Secret of Kells, in which Moore explains on pages 62 to 64. We discovered that the Book of Kells has artistic influence and ink from all over the medieval world, and so we decided to represent this with monks who have traveled from as far away as Asia and Africa to work in the scriptorium. Brother Tang was named after an Asian market in Paris called Frère Tang, located close to where our screenwriter Fabrice Ziolkowski lived. Brother Square originally represented the Coptic Church. However, during voice recording, he became an English gentleman. Brother Leonardo is of course an Italian monk, with Brother Sergei a tribute to the great Russian filmmaker Sergei Eisenstein. I was particularly fascinated by the design of the Vikings. 2 white dots that serve as eyes seem to be a part of the horned helmets that cover their heads, making them seem as inhuman as the atrocities they commit against the helpless Irish villagers. Here is what Moore had to say regarding the Viking designs on page 187 of Designing the Secret of Kells. I asked Jean-Baptiste, one of the character designers, to create these designs to contrast with head character designer Barry Reynolds' more fluid and organic approach to the main characters. In the end, we settled on these blocky, horned, demon-like designs. They were meant to be cold, impersonal, and frightening, as if imagined by a child in medieval times. They were based only on scant descriptions rather than actual Vikings of the period. They represent darkness, and as such, are more a force of nature than human characters. Similarly, some of the main characters are based on Irish history and lore, whether by name, trait, or personality. One of my favorites is Pangur Bán, the white cat belonging to Brother Aidan. The name and character come from an ancient poem, also called Pangur Bán, supposedly written by an anonymous monk in the 9th century about the titular cat living with a scholar who hunts words the way it hunts mice. In fact, during the end credits, a condensed modern Irish version is recited by Aidan's voice actor, Mick Lally. Here is a rough English translation. Me and white Pangur, two who relish bundles of art, me pursuing that which does not come easy, slippery Pangur hunts prey. Fame or repute I seek not, as I turn ink into glowing light. Little does Pangur value the words of a prophet. He would much prefer a mouse to a book. Pangur, do you see that in the corner? Aidan himself is an elderly man, but like his namesake, which translates to fiery or bringer of fire, his passion for art and bookmaking are as infectious as his wisdom, and he lets nothing dissuade him from passing his skills and benefits on to future generations. Aisling's name, loosely translated in English, means vision or dream. She is a fairy child with very pale skin, long flowing hair, and the ability to change herself into a white wolf at will, emphasizing her mystical, carefree nature, characteristic of the wild ambience of Ireland. Though hostile toward Brendan at first for trespassing in her forest, she later forgives him and acts as his guide to the natural world and its miracles. Brendan himself, as well as his relationship with his stern Uncle Calach, I believe is complex but still relatable. As much as he wishes to please Calach and follow in his footsteps by eventually taking responsibility of the abbey, it is obvious that Brendan has a vivid and artistic imagination, fueled by his visits to the abbey scriptorium and the stories told to him by the other monks. Calach forbids Brendan from ever leaving the abbey because of the dangers of the outside world, but this does not make him a villain by any means. Beneath his cold, calculating demeanor, Calach has a loving heart, caring deeply for both his nephew and his charges, which ironically has blinded him to the wants and happiness of his loved ones, even as it drives him fiercely to protect. One aspect of The Secret of Kells that I found particularly interesting was its portrayal of religion. Brendan lives in a place and time that is predominantly Christian, and yet, just as Brendan becomes increasingly open to other facets of faith, the film also gives nod to other beliefs that were common then as well. Brendan learns throughout the film about the dreaded pre-Christian worm-like deity Crom Cruach. Calach tells him it's just quote-unquote pagan nonsense. Aisling tells him it's very real and dangerous and that it takes everything around it. And Aidan tells him about Crom Cruach's special eye, which Brendan must obtain in order to create the intricate detail so desperately needed to give the Book of Kells its divine splendor. I believe that, partly because this is a children's film, both cultural systems are touched on in a way that is tasteful without being uncomfortable or forceful. Overall, I think what I enjoy most about this film is its message. While art may not necessarily be practical for physical needs, nor can it protect against real and dangerous forces, it's what makes us human, and what gives us the hope and reason to keep on living, and the strength and faith to withstand the worst that life can throw at us. Gather round next time for another tale you may have forgotten or have never heard before. Until then, listeners, may inspiration always find you. Greetings, fair listeners, and welcome to this special holiday-themed episode of The Tale Collector, celebrating stories and storytelling in all their forms and the bards and artists who bring them all to life. I'm your host, Erica Adams. When it comes to Christmas stories, I'm not afraid to admit that I am a bit old-fashioned. Whether they be the classic TV specials of yesteryear, like the animated Dr. Seuss's How the Grinch Stole Christmas, Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, and Frosty the Snowman, or the century-old legends like 'Twas the Night Before Christmas, A Christmas Carol, and, my personal favorite, The Nutcracker, the tales I love best around the holidays are the ones that not only share the festiveness of the Christmas tradition, but relate that all-powerful mantra, the true meaning of Christmas, in ways that are both humbling and universal. Plus, just like good old Charlie Brown, I also have a tendency to feel some depression by today's commercialism of Christmas. All of which leads me to this month's topic. I can't recall the circumstances of how I found this book, but I've always been glad that I did. It's only about 10 years old or so, and yet its characters, its artwork, and its message easily make it feel timeless. To celebrate such a joyous occasion, I'd like to talk about one of my all-time favorite Christmas novels, The Legend of Holly Claus by Brittany Ryan, released in 2004 and recommended for readers 9 and up. This story begins with a sort of reversal on a cherished tradition. As the special holiday draws near, children from all over the world write letters to Santa Claus filled with wishes that they would like granted and gifts they would like to receive. But then, one poor little boy named Christopher decides to write a letter of a very different kind to Santa. Rather than asking him for some gift, Christopher presents him with a question that no mortal has ever asked. What do you wish for Christmas, Santa? And it is this boy's letter that marks a new beginning for Santa Claus, better known in his realm as Nicholas, for it makes him realize that what he would truly love more than anything is a child of his own. This in turn marks a new beginning for the land of the immortals, a place in which love conquers time, and over which the kind and wise Nicholas reigns as king, alongside his beautiful queen, Viviana. Unfortunately, Herakan, an evil sorcerer banished by the very universe itself, places a curse upon Holly, the newborn princess, which imprisons her heart in ice and permanently locks the gates to the land of the immortals. So now, with the exception of Nicholas for his annual Christmas delivery, no immortal can leave the kingdom, nor can the deceased mortals who have earned immortality enter. It ultimately falls on Holly herself to foil Herakan's plans. Traveling to early 20th century New York as a young woman, and upon seeing for herself just how much in need it is of the warmth and compassion the city has long since lost, especially toward its children, both rich and poor, Holly strives to find a way to bring joy back into the people's lives, and thereby use the strength and courage that joy gives her to defeat Herakan and keep the spirit and wonder of Christmas alive for all the people of the world who need it most. To begin with, both the cover art by Ryan herself and the accompanying illustrations of Laura Long are just breathtaking, combining elegant realism with whimsical fancy. There is a separate page at the beginning of the book listing the location of every picture within, each one a work of art in and of itself, with such gorgeous pencil-shaded detail that they appear more like portraits of real people than fictional illustrations. One of my favorites is on page 113, depicting Holly's bedroom. The chandelier and the canopy of her bed are all lined with ice crystals, and the numerous leaves of silvery trees cover the entire ceiling, as if the room is within a forest. Her toys, dolls, and wooden soldiers and stuffed animals lay strewn about the floor or bursting out of the toy chest, all but forgotten. With Tundra, her wolf guardian, and Lexi the fox watching intently from below, Holly stands upon a stack of books so as to reach her enchanted telescope, through which she can see all the way into the mortal world. This is one Christmas story that I believe is truly original. Ryan breathes new life into both the legend and the man that is Santa Claus. Once known as St. Nicholas during his mortal life on Earth, once that life ended, he was crowned the king of the land of forever by the elders of the universe for his selfless acts of generosity. And while this title literally and figuratively gives him vast power over both humans and a wide array of magical creatures, he is still someone who would gladly offer a knee for a child to climb onto for a story before bedtime. And speaking of children, just as the legends say, Nicholas always has a special place in his heart for the young, as not only are they and their antics just so adorable, but their faith in dreams and magic has a power all its own, for which he has the utmost respect and love, as shown in an excerpt on pages 16 through 17. "Of course, she did throw that doll down the well, Your Highness," said a calm voice from the corner. Nicholas glanced over to the speaker, a pure white wolf who lay, apparently asleep, on the thick, soft rug. "Of course she did," he agreed. "Banged her on the head first and then tossed her in." "And the funeral, sire. She made the neighbor children pay to come." Nicholas laughed harder. "Did she? That's my little Molly, bless her soul." He thought for a moment. "It sounds as though we've lost Stella, though, Tara." "Yes, Your Majesty," said the wolf quietly. She knew that it always hurt him when they stopped believing. "But Molly now, she'll be with us a long time," said Nicholas brightly. "Maybe she's one of the ones who will last forever." He reached for the next letter, but his mind lingered on Molly. How he would mourn the day she stopped writing to him. But no, he scolded himself. He would have the pleasure of watching her story unfold. And besides, that's how it had to be. Nicholas, burrowed in his chair, read letter after letter. Many of them made him smile. A few made him laugh out loud. But each one was precious to him, for it told him the story of a child he knew and loved. Kostya was trying to be considerate of others, and a new butterfly net would help. Astrid was certain she could be good if only she had a set of paints. Santiago admitted that he had behaved terribly about the cat, but regretted it and wanted some soldiers, please. Elena and Concetta were bent on becoming pirates, so they needed some books on the subject. Silas planned to go west as soon as possible and would require a small wagon. On and on it went, thousands of children, each alive to possibility and dreams. Holly, as she grows up, proves to be just as kind and noble as her legendary father, striving to help all she meets however she can, from teaching a cockeyed reindeer to fly, to using her newfound ability to form perfect dolls with only her hands in almost no time flat. But she finds herself hindered by Harakon's curse, not only by the very nature of it, as she must always stay in cold areas to keep her heart alive, but by the other repercussions it brings on, such as many people in the kingdom being afraid of Holly, believing that her presence outside the castle may bring another visit from Harakon. This, in fact, exemplifies one of the main messages of the story, how fear alone is capable of crippling, if not destroying, dreams and life. When she, at long last, makes it to New York City, she finds the population divided by age as well as class, and, consequently, by distress and confusion. For instance, Holly invites some rich but timid children to play with her in the snow, before being stopped by their stern governess. On page 262 to 263. Miss Bellow's sharp eyes took in Holly's disheveled appearance. And under whose authority have you invited the children in my care to go skating with ruffians?" "Under my own," said Holly steadily. "I'm afraid, Miss Claus, or whoever you are, that is insufficient. The children of Dr. Louis Brunfeld do not proceed in such a disordered fashion, and they most certainly do not skate in the kind of low company you obviously find attractive." "What do you mean by low company?" asked Holly, honestly curious. Miss Bellows turned redder than ever. "The common squalid characters who frequent the lake. That's what I mean by low company, Miss Claus." "Ah," said Holly, staring at Miss Bellows' face. "That's what you mean," she repeated absently. "And now I bid you good day," snapped Miss Bellows. Holly tilted her head questioningly. She seemed to be thinking about something far different than the topic at hand. She looked into Miss Bellows' small blue eyes for a moment, until the governess dropped her gaze. The children watched, open-mouthed, for Miss Bellows appeared suddenly not to know what to do. She was twisting her handkerchief in the strangest fashion. "What are you afraid of?" said Holly softly. "The children," gulped Miss Bellows. "Why?" asked Holly. "Because they hate me." "No, they are frightened of you, but they don't hate you. They will love you if you love them." Holly looked intently into Miss Bellows' eyes, and then transferred Evelyn's hand from her own to the governess's. Miss Bellows swallowed visibly. Evelyn, staring at her governess's fearful face, suddenly felt a rush of compassion for Miss Bellows. Ryan does not simply give readers a little village in the middle of the North Pole, teeming with elves and reindeer. Here is a place that only 5 living mortals have witnessed, encircled in magical jewel-like glaciers, and where silver snowflakes swirl in the air like ballet dancers, where the spirit of Christmas is a way of life, as far away and yet not so far away as a dream, but every bit as enchanting. In this way, though Holly Claus is primarily Christmas-themed, it has something for every lover of fantasy. Holly serves as the bridge that reconnects humanity with the love of childhood and the power of faith. In fact, though I don't know if this practice is still in effect today, this book and its heroine have become so popular that back in 2005, the United States Post Office officially recognized Holly's home as an address, to which children can write letters to Holly and the Claus family, and Ryan actually answers those letters as Holly herself. Ryan combines pure wonder with rich detail and compelling characters and narrative to create a delight for both the eye and the imagination in honor of the most joyous of holidays. Gather round next time for another tale you may have forgotten or have never heard before. Until then, listeners, may inspiration always find you.